Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. We know it's lunchtime for some of you guys, so thank you for being here and spending this time with us. This is the third-party risk assessment webinar. It's going to be presented by Lou and Remington. Lou is the founder and CEO of Cyber Defense Group with over 25 years of experience in the IT field and decades worth of innovative cybersecurity expertise. His extensive background positions him to speak on both an executive and operational level. On the other hand, we also have Remington Winters. He is a seasoned security engineer with years of industry leadership experience. He has served as the head of information security at Ticketmaster and the director of security at Warner Brothers. So it's safe to say that these two are very knowledgeable about this field, and I'm gonna let you guys take it away.
Thanks, Tu. So that's on to you, Remington.
Yeah, so, as we all know, third-party risk is something we all face. And, it's not just small companies, large companies with very extensive security teams have been hit by this. These are some of the notable ones most recently. Everybody has heard of the SolarWinds. It's kind of been all over the place, but some of the ones that are less notable are, Marriott, Kroger, GE, Tesla, and SpaceX recently were involved in a third-party breach as well. So it just goes to show you, no matter how large your security team is, and Target has one of the largest security teams of any company in the world, actually, they're still vulnerable if you're not managing your third-party risk with your vendors and external partners.
So can you speak to some of the details of some of these, what happened during some of these breaches?
Sure, absolutely. SolarWinds was actually, that's the most obvious one that's in the news. They were hacked, and then they were used as a jumping off point as a third-party vendor for many different companies and government organizations. They were actually hacked by what is apparently probably a Russian APT known as Cozy Bear. And it's a very, very friendly name for a very dangerous group. Unfortunately, they had an intern who leaked one of their passwords to one of their internal tools, and the passwords was actually SolarWinds123, unfortunately, and that was leaked out. And they were used to infiltrate many different companies by infiltrating them by putting in malware into their updated software. So when people updated their SolarWinds, they actually ended up downloading malware that compromised multiple systems.
Yeah, I'd love to interject there with SolarWinds. It was really shocking that the CEO blamed an intern for a password that was entered probably 2 years ago. Nice to throw that poor intern under the bus, but what that shows is lack of a access audit in their security program, which they should have caught multiple times before the breach.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Target was also a very high profile breach. And that was actually an HVAC contractor. Somebody who was doing their various HVAC had network credentials into their system, which is kind of bizarre to begin with, but they didn't really do their due diligence, and that HVAC contractor was compromised, and then that gave them access into Target's systems, and then quite a bit of customer data was leaked in that. SpaceX and Tesla, that's a fairly interesting one. There's a third-party parts maker that makes various small machine parts, and they were breached through a phishing email. And so while the attackers weren't able to get into the SpaceX or Tesla systems, SpaceX and Tesla data and confidential data was leaked through the third party. So things like purchasing agreements and parts diagrams, even Boeing was actually part of that. And I didn't have room for their logo here, but Boeing was part of that. And there was things like missile diagrams, parts were leaked as well. So, it just goes to show that, there's multiple different ways that a third party can present risk into an organization.
That's right. And for many of the people that might be watching this, if you're not a Fortune 100 company, you're probably doing business with a Fortune 100 company. And when you get all of those inbound third-party assessments, now you know why, because the more this happens, the more this is in the news, they crank down tighter and tighter. And those inbound requests can be pretty the inbound requests can be pretty daunting. I just realized I messed up. Yeah. So when you're doing these inbound, when you're getting these inbound requests, it's a review of your security program. So hopefully, if you're watching this, you have a security program that you're proud of, that you're producing evidence of all the good controls that you have in place. And when you get these questionnaires, you're easily able to fill them out, provide your evidence of SOC 2 or some other kind of ISO 27001 audit report, successful, no findings, and you can go on your way. Unfortunately, what we are seeing is that's not the case, both in the sense that many companies are still getting their compliance in order, they're still getting their security programs in order, and when these inbound requests come in, it's kind of a scramble, and especially the volume, depending on who you're doing business with, the volume can be pretty daunting. So this is an area where we help, and it's an area where the better you have put into place the controls that you need for your security program, the easier it will be to respond to these requests. So in this webinar, we're going to be speaking mostly, I think, about outbound requests, but we do cover a bit of inbound requests too. So hopefully at the end of this, we're going to give you a nice little giveaway, which is a form, a questionnaire that we consider to be the minimum that you could ask of an external vendor for you to vet your own external parties. But you're probably getting those questionnaires yourselves, and sometimes it's hundreds of questions, which can be pretty tedious.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Lou said, we're going to be going through a lot of the meat of this webinar is going to be outbound requests, and this is really how you ensure that the vendors and third parties that you're working with have at least a minimum level of security, and we'll be going through that in the next few slides.
So some of the business drivers that are here for responding to these third-party requests are, we call it swimming upstream. So we deal with a lot of tech startups and a lot of companies that are created in the last 5 years, but they've got, even though they have a small footprint, they've got a large internet footprint and a smaller team usually. And a lot of times they find themselves doing business with the Fortune 50. They might be an AI chatbot that was created, with a team of a smaller team of people, and now they find themselves swimming upstream to respond to those requests. There's also the regulatory requirements that are required sometimes when you start to get into larger industries, and you might have regulatory, might be HIPAA, which is really a self-regulatory. It's not a federal regulation, but you've also got GDPR for Europe, you've got CPRA for California. Virginia's just passed their privacy law. So there are normally a lot of regulatory requirements. When you're doing a third-party assessment, you're going to need to respond to those and show how you're compliant with those standards. But some other business drivers would be future-proofing your business. I mean, this is really one of our biggest mantras at CDG. We want businesses to be able to be secure so you can do more. So it's not just about determining where your faults are with your vendors, but it's also making sure that you're protecting your data and your customers' data through vetting your third parties, so you will continue to be a force to be reckoned with in business for a long time. As we stated in the breached slide, there's a lot of companies that are actually have been breached through their third parties. So you don't want to be on that list. So by doing outbound third-party requests, you are future-proofing your business. And finally, when you're committing to a security program internally, as we spoke about with those inbound requests, you're actually reducing your response time for those numerous questionnaires that you'll be getting. So it really makes sense to commit to a third-party program, both internally and externally.
So yeah, for the threat assessment, really what it comes down to, what we looked at with the different companies that were breached, it's not a single point of failure, and there's multiple avenues where a third party can introduce risk. So APIs, companies that provide data out to other companies, you're giving them an access into your system and trusting that they will both use that responsibly and secure it. Things like Facebook, the Cambridge Analytica things, that was APIs with third parties, third-party libraries. So there's a huge thing right now with NPM. It's known as dependency hijacking, where if you are trusting a third party to provide a library that you are, dynamically grabbing from a repository like NPM or apt or something like that, you're trusting that those libraries are maintained and available. With NPM, one of the problems is if people are referencing an old, outdated library and that library is no longer maintained, someone else can come in and register a library with that same name. And then when your software grabs that library, it's actually grabbing malware that has been hosted under that same name. And so that's another avenue of third parties that most people don't really think about. Legacy vendors that have huge amounts of access into your system. Sometimes people have vendors that they have not had any sort of contact with for a long time, even though that they have been working with them. It just could be somebody like doing recycling or records management in the background that may have access to the system and may not be actively involved in the security program. So obviously your critical vendors, anybody who's holding data, things like web hosts, data vendors, anywhere you are storing data with a third party. And then vendors with physical access. This is often overlooked, but vendors who actually come into the office and have access to data, making sure that they are doing things like background checks on their employees, that they're not bringing people into your environment that are possibly criminals. And people, like in the Target issue where they had network access, possibly to do some sort of troubleshooting on their equipment, they may have that access, and that they may not be going through the normal onboarding and offboarding channels as well. And then acquisitions. So Marriott in 2013 suffered a breach after they acquired Starwood. And Starwood had been compromised for about 2 years before that acquisition without being noticed. And when they were brought into the Marriott network, those bad actors then had access into the entire Marriott network, not just the Starwood network. So that's something to think about during any sort of M&A where you are treating that new acquisition as if they were a third party and making sure that their security is up to snuff before you bring them into your environment.
So when we're talking about third-party vendor management and third-party risk management, who in the company typically cares? We've broken it down into really 3 buckets, and this is generalizing, obviously. So hopefully everyone cares, but typically the first kind of silo would be revenue, either revenue generation or revenue protection. And that's where the CEO cares, because bringing in revenue and protecting revenue, a breach is not a fun thing to go through. We often are doing incident response as well, and for some major incidents, including an entire company down, not able to work for weeks on end. That's expensive. So the CEO wants to protect the revenue around that, and sales wants to generate revenue, obviously. And in generating revenue, they can go out and kind of sing from the rooftops how secure the company is. It's really encouraging these days to see that companies are using privacy and security as a driver in the marketplace, a differentiator, saying, hey, we've committed to our security program. And again, that's our methodology at CDG. When we help companies, we're saying, this is a way for you to differentiate yourself from your competitors because you have a strong security program. You can really put that on your website and have your sales team push that. And that's also from a marketing perspective. Sales and marketing are always going hand in hand. The marketing team can push out all of that literature saying, hey, look at our company, we're really doing, or our organization, we're doing it right, and we're protecting your data. The other area of the company that really cares is legal, as per usual. So we find that we work with a lot of legal departments. We like working with the lawyers because they understand risk, and they also are able to speak to the executive team in a way that they listen. I mean, you ignore your lawyer's advice at your own peril. So we like to work with the legal teams, both from the privacy and the compliance standpoint. And third-party risk management is part of that. It's a huge part of GDPR, the European Data Protection Act. It's really a huge part of almost every security control set going forward, and it will continue to be a force to be reckoned with. So these three areas of the company typically are the ones that we're working with and care about it the most.
So, like we said before, the outbound reviews are critical. These are where you are sending out these questionnaires to your third parties and making sure that they are aware of security and maintaining security around your data. So the first step really in creating an outbound review is identifying your critical vendors. Which vendors have data, and what data do they have? From there, you can give them a questionnaire that seeks to identify what security they have around your data, and not just your data, but their environment as a whole. Really, how are they? Do they have a security program? Do they have a security team? Are they actually implementing the policies that they have in place? A lot of companies will have baked boilerplate policies, and nobody uses them or touches them. So it's really a matter of it's not we don't want to be the Gestapo here, right? The goal here is to trust your vendors, but also verify that they actually are doing what they say they're going to be doing, and making sure that they have proper controls around the security of the data. And then recertifying annually. So this is something that Lou brought up earlier, is a lot of companies may start out small, where they have 2 or 3 people and everybody knows everybody. And as they grow, they may have security lapses, and they may be growing faster than they can keep up with their security. So it's important to maintain a level of awareness around their security, and keep recertifying that on a regular basis to make sure that what was true last year is still true this year. And then really understanding that at the end of the day, you can't control what they do. So really it comes down to having a robust contractual language, having a security addendum to all contracts that involve data in a third party or access to a third party, making sure that they understand that it is their responsibility to maintain their security, and that there are contractual and legal ramifications to them breaching that trust.
And for inbound reviews, some of the things that you need to look at are, as we stated earlier, creating a strong security program. That's your best defense against the constant onslaught of questionnaires, third-party security questionnaires you may be getting from your customers. Once you have a strong security program, you should be able to provide that evidence and understand, help your customers understand your security posture. Also, you want to have well-documented policies and procedures as well, which can point to the governance structure that you've put into place for your environment. And you also want to find efficiencies. There are ways for you to respond to these questionnaires in a repeatable format, and that's either by finding software vendor or creating a database of known responses. That kind of stuff can really speed that up, because these do get tedious and they can be a pretty big lift on the team. Finally, aligning with a control standard, or getting audited against one of these control standards like SOC 2 or ISO 27001. These are good ideas. NIST would be a great one too. which is a bigger lift than SOC 2 and ISO 27001. But having some kind of standard that you've been audited against, you've been externally assessed against, and you can provide an audit report for, that really goes a long way for when your customers are vetting you. Sometimes they'll take that and say, okay, we'll take your SOC 2 report, we'll take your ISO report, and we'll consider you secure because you've been audited. So, how do you choose a framework? We talked about SOC 2. That's mostly a domestic framework, control framework, and that's by the AICPA, which is kind of strange. It's an accounting organization. It really is SOC 2 type 1 or type 2. You want to do a SOC 2 type 2, usually that's over time, but you could do a SOC 2 type 1. There's some confusion about SOC 1 and SOC 3. I would say stay away from those. Really, the SOC 2 type 1 or 2 is what you're looking at. And that's accepted generally in the US, but internationally, no one's going to care about SOC 2. That's why we recommend ISO 27001. That's more of an international standard. The nice thing about ISO is it's a little less prescriptive. It basically is making sure that you do what you say you're doing. So it's heavily reliant on your policies. They give you a framework for how you should set up your policies and governance structure. And then one of the main tenets around ISO is continuous improvement. So we really like ISO. We align many of our clients with ISO. And it is an international standard, so it's accepted all over the world. And then we have NIST, which is a US government, NIST, that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, 853 R4. R5 is coming out, I think, this year, revision 5. And this is a control set that's extremely prescriptive. If you're in defense, if you're a defense contractor or subcontractor, you're probably formally under DFARS, which is NIST 800-171, which is a subset of the 853. Or now that's become CMMC, which is the capability. It basically goes around capabilities and maturity, which is a really good way for them to look at it. We look at the world through a maturity lens as well. But yeah, 853 is a gold standard. And then there's low, moderate, or high for the controls that you conform to. So we like that framework if you're really looking for a prescriptive way to manage your security program. And then, you want to engage a security partner. Obviously, this is self-serving because that's what we do. But it's important for you to have an external security team. One of the reasons we exist is security teams have traditionally been really small. Remington and I have worked together previously at a place where it was a 1 to a couple thousand ratio for the security team to all employees, and that's pretty typical. It's rare for you to see a security team with thousands of employees, and there's a couple reasons for that. One of them, it's hard to find good security talent, and the other is that it's just not an investment area for a lot of companies. It's becoming more and more, but it still has not grown to that level. So because of that, we exist. And so when you engage a security partner, you get an overflow for your security team so they can concentrate on the day-to-day, and we can concentrate on more of the strategic stuff. And it's also a sanity check for the current program, or providing evidence to auditors. Typically, in any control standard, you're going to have an external assessment by an independent third party, and that's why it's important to engage a security partner for that. And also for a lot of companies, it's because talent is so scarce, and all of our clients are very agile, moving super quickly. Their number one priority is pushing code. We are the ones that come in and create the program. So if you engage a security partner, you're going to have them create and manage your program while you're concentrating on the code building. And then hopefully, if they have the same methodology as we do, they will create the program for you, and then you can hire internally for resources to manage that program. So kind of finalizing here, I'm going to go back, or maybe not. I'm just going to move forward here. So the third-party strategy that you should employ is you want to first have a policy and a program, which is necessary with almost anything you do. You want to start with governance, and then kind of fill in the gaps and implement from there. Once you have your policy and program in place, you want to identify your critical vendors. And that's what's important. A lot of times we'll work with people and they'll say, companies, how do we assess every single vendor? Do we really need to assess AWS and things like that? I mean, depending on the size of company and the size of spend you have on AWS, you're very unlikely to be, getting approval from AWS to do an audit on them. They're just going to give you their SOC 2, their ISO, their NIST, and every other standard that they've achieved to prove they are secure. So what you want to do is identify your critical vendors that are holding data, and especially those that are not AWS or a company that can demonstrate its security easily. And that's what that questionnaire is for. Once you identify critical vendors, this is really internally, depending on the size of your organization, you want to create a self-service capability for third parties. This is where a lot of companies fall down as well, because if you have the strategy, if you have a good policy and a good program, you will have created for each business unit a way for them to vet their vendors. And the big challenge here is that, let's say you create this and it's good for your maybe DevOps or IT infrastructure, but what about marketing? What about when marketing goes and has to spin up a vendor and then collect all of this personally identifiable information that might have some compliance and regulatory requirements around it? They don't know possibly about the way that you vet third parties. They put a credit card down and they just engage the vendor. Not a great way to do it. So if you create a self-service capability, you're enabling all the business units to conform to the third-party policy and program that you've created. The other thing, again, with the questionnaire that we're going to be handing out, and I think there's a lot of value. We've not just given you a generic one. This is one that we believe is one that you could hand out today and really get a very good look at what is the security posture of your third party that's holding your critical data. Any of those critical vendors that you have identified, they should get this questionnaire or something like it. It's a good start if you want to get deeper. But we like it to be succinct, meaning that the 200 questionnaires, not only are they hard for you to fill out on behalf of your customers, but also they're hard for the customer to actually go through. Now, a lot of companies are outsourcing this. They're offshoring the questionnaires, which does not actually give them a better level of security. I think the longer the questionnaire, the less likely you are to really understand the posture of the organization. So I would say keeping it short and sweet is the best strategy, and that's what we've done in the one that we're going to give you as a handout. RACI, having a responsibility matrix, which will enable the whole organization to understand who does what, in the third-party policy, risk management, and third-party risk management program. What you're going to want to do is have everyone understand where they fit into that responsibility matrix, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. And then finally, monitoring the state of that policy. We talked earlier about having an ability to go back to your vendors on an annual basis and say, hey, has anything changed? That's really important too. I mean, we've worked at places where, large Fortune 50 organizations that have had vendors for many, many years. They've been around for 20, 30 plus years. They've been working with a vendor, and the vendor has never been vetted except maybe once in the last 10 years. Not a good idea. So many things change, especially in the current environment, especially post-COVID, where a lot of the attack surface has changed and increased. You really want to make sure that on an annual basis, you are vetting your critical third-party vendors. And I think that's it. That wraps up our presentation.
All right, so thank you guys. That was a lot of information that we just spoke about, and I understand if there are any questions that you wanted to ask, anything that you guys wanted Lou or Remington to go deeper into. If you guys did have any questions, now's the time. You can go ahead and click on the Q&A button or raise your hand if you wanted to speak, and I can allow you guys to unmute as well.
Yeah, and I will say, Steve gave he put something in the chat that in New Zealand, I didn't know this, so that's good to know, Steve, that New Zealand government agencies do accept SOC 2. I think probably they might in Australia. I haven't looked that up. The English speaking companies, probably England, they do it as well, United Kingdom. But I would say definitely not in a lot of the other European countries would they accept a SOC 2 that I know of.
One thing while we're waiting for questions, one thing I'll add, we didn't really get too much into is, think about if your company has a website, think about how many third parties you have on that website, right? You have a lot of different ad trackers, you have third-party JavaScript running all over the place, and that can definitely get dangerous. There's been a lot of high-profile breaches that have happened where some ad company gets hacked, and then they're pushing code out to every single site that is running their third-party JavaScript code. And when you put somebody's code on your site and it's just a script tag, that code is running as if it had the security context of your own code. So it really can do anything to your customers that you can, which is pretty scary. So it's definitely something to think about. And very few people actually do third-party risk assessments on their third-party JavaScript. So just another thing to think about and keep in mind.
Well, if we don't have questions, I think we can give everyone a good 25 minutes back. Hopefully you found this useful, and hopefully you'll find the questionnaire that we're going to hand out afterwards very useful for your environments. And if you're watching this in a recorded fashion, feel free to reach out to info@cdg.io if you'd like a copy of that questionnaire.
Yes, of course. Thank you guys, everyone, for being here. Again, we knew it took some time, but thank you. And we hope you guys enjoyed the webinar. And all of the questionnaires and this recording will be sent to you guys after this in your registered emails.